GI segment show. Also, today in this segment, I'm at Endo Line Railroad Park and Museum in Currie, Minnesota. Endo Line Railroad Park and Museum is located on 440 Mill Street in North in Currie, Minnesota, and also the museum is open Memorial Day to Labor Day, Wednesdays through Sundays, 10 to 5. The railroad that used to run to Currie was a branch line of the Chicago, St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Omaha Railway, incorporated in 1880. It's a consolidation of the Chicago, St. Paul, and Minneapolis Railway and the North Wisconsin Railway. Most of its trackage was in Wisconsin and Minnesota, but there was additional trackage in Iowa, Nebraska, and South Dakota, and total trackage eventually reached 1,616 miles. The Chicago Northwestern Railroad gained control of the company in 1882, leased the road in 1957, and finally merged the two companies in 1972. In 1899, the Des Moines Valley Railway Company began work on a plan to extend their rail line in western Minnesota, an additional 38.6 miles northwest from Bingham Lake to Currie. Nearly 14 miles of track was laid and put into operation that year. The remaining 24.73 miles of rails between Jeffers and Currie was finished the following year. Upon the completion of the spur, the Des Moines Valley Railway Company and all of its property was purchased by the Chicago, St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Omaha Railroad. The line that to Currie came off the main line at Bingham Lake, Minnesota, and was originally planned to go through South Dakota, but with lines going through Tracy on the north and Slayton on the south, there was never any incentive to build past Currie, and this truly was the endo of the line. In Currie, the track spurred to create forks off the main line. One fork went to the water tower, sand tower, coal shed, engine house, and turntable. The other three passed across the road to three former grain elevators, freight line and passenger line, which was where the original depot once stood. In 1972, Endo Line Railroad Park and Museum started as a community pride project and was taken over by Murray County in 1975. It is dedicated to collecting, preserving, exhibiting, and interpreting artifacts and stories of the Southwest Minnesota frontier experience. Also, the museum offers tours every hour. If you do, check the website for more information. Okay, you can see right here is a switch stand displayed at Endo Line Railroad Park, and this has a plaque that you can read if you ever come here. Yeah, you could even move it. Yeah, nice piece of railroad memorabilia right here. You could also see right here is another switch stand, same side of the turntable, and also you'd have to press down and I'm afraid it's bolted in place, but yeah, nice railroad memorabilia it has here. That is here at the museum and park. What you see right behind me is the turntable. This turntable was built by American Bridge Company in Chicago, Illinois in 1901, and it is an Armstrong turntable and is a manual operated turntable. And also this turntable is pushed around by human beings like myself, and people turn rail cars and locomotives on it as well. Also, this turntable has been here for many years, and it was used for the Chicago, St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Omaha Railroad at the end of the branch line in Currie, and also the turntable is 70 feet long and just over 6 feet wide, and the platform on top of the undercarriage was constructed of 16-foot oak timbers over which rail was laid. The pit that held held the turntable varied in depth
from 4 feet at the outer edge to 7 feet at the center. Mankato limestone lined the entire pit, and stones were carefully fitted together to eliminate the need for mortar. Then, by 1973, the turntable had deteriorated to the point that it could no longer be used. It was offered for sale, and the community decided to purchase it. Also, it was completely restored, and it is even used for people to ride on it during a tour, and some pieces of equipment are even rotated on it as well.
You see right behind me is Brookville Equipment Corp. 1248.
Brookville Equipment Corp. 1148 was built by Brookville Locomotive Works in Brookville, Pennsylvania in 1942 and is the 2743rd diesel locomotive built by that factory and is a gas-powered 8-ton switcher-type diesel locomotive. This locomotive was used for moving freight cars and switching freight cars around in the yard for many years. Then later on it was retired and was likely down in Alabama for a while, and then later came to be part of the Endoline Railroad Park and Museum in Currie, Minnesota, where it is on display today.
What you see right behind me is Grand Trunk Western 77046.
Grand Trunk Western 77046 was built probably by the Grand Trunk Railway in 1942 and is a wooden caboose. Originally was used for the Grand Trunk Railroad in Canada, then transferred to the Grand Trunk Western and was used on the Grand Trunk Western Railroad as the train crew's office and used on the back of freight trains as well. Then later on, Grand Trunk Western 77046 was retired and got put on display at Endoline Railroad Park and Museum in Currie, Minnesota, where it is today, and also you can even go inside it, but you'll need to go on tour for that though.
Okay, I'm going to walk around the engine house, show the exhibits, and here we go.
Okay, so here we go walking inside the engine house, and here's a luggage cart, and here's some miniature trains that used to run outside here at the Endoline Railroad Park and Museum, but now displayed on this shelf. And here's a speeder and a boggy and a velocipede. Yeah, here's a crossing light. You would see it ringing, of course. And here's some track tools. It's a modern train station bench. And yeah, so much to see. And here's some Chicago Northwestern, the Milwaukee Road, a glimpse pioneer railroading in Murray County. And yeah, so much. And here's Hobo Country. And yeah, a lot to see in here.
What you see right behind me is Southern Minnesota Railroad 13.
Southern Minnesota Railroad 13 was built by Baldwin in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1875 and is the 3781st steam locomotive built by that factory and is a 260 mogul type steam locomotive. This locomotive was built as a 36-inch gauge locomotive. It was originally built for the Ferrocarril de Salvatori e Trujillo as Ferrocarril de Salvatori e Trujillo 6 in Trujillo, Peru. Then later on, it was then sold to the Cia del Ferrocarril y Muelle de Pimentel, and also number was changed as if it was then Cia del Ferrocarril y Muelle de Pimentel 16 in Pimentel, Peru. And this locomotive had been spending most of the time working in Peru in South America for many years until it was retired and then moved to the United States of America, which it was the country it was built in and where it lives today. In 1969, it was bought by John Pettingill in Ellenville, New York, then later sold to an unknown location in Green Bay, Wisconsin in 1972. Then in 1974 was acquired by the Marriott Corporation in Dayton, Ohio. Also was stored with several other engines at the Buckeye Boiler Company, part of a venture called the International Amusement Company in Dayton, Ohio until 1976, and then it was relocated to Marriott's Great America Amusement Park in Gurnee, Illinois in 1979. The locomotive sat derelict until about 1983 when it was donated to the Illinois Railway Museum in Union, Illinois, then was sold in 1986 and restored in Fort Wayne, and then put on display at an antique store in Frisco, Colorado, and renumbered 13, and then the tender had the word saying Denver, South Park, and Pacific. Then, a short time, it was on display at the Prairie Expo Museum, which is the Pioneer Village in Worthington, Minnesota, and the tender relettered as Minnesota Southern Railroad. Then, later on, it was moved to here at Endo Line Railroad Park and Museum in Currie, Minnesota, and seen here displayed in the engine house, and also as you're up close to it, you'll need to go on tour for that most likely, or have a volunteer of the museum accompany you, and they also let you ring the locomotive's bells well. And that's how it's done.
You can see right here is a speeder and one behind me, as well as a MOW flatbed body and one with the crane. And these two may have been used on the railroad here in Currie, but they were used for many years ago. Both of these speeders were towed by Fairmount and can be seen displayed in this spot where they are today. What you see right behind me is the Chicago, St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Omaha depot.
The Chicago, St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Omaha Currie Depot was built in like 1900, and it was originally located on the west side of Mill Street, just near the old grain elevator that was torn down and was used by the Chicago, St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Omaha Railroad for many years. And it's where people would board a train going somewhere from Currie or arriving on a train coming from somewhere into Currie, Minnesota. Also, there is a waiting room that it was for women and a waiting room for men. Then, in 1972, some group members noticed an ad in the paper stating that the depot was up for sale and needed to be moved off the property or it would be demolished. But then they asked their 4-H leader what they should do. The 4-H leaders told the girls to write to Chicago Northwestern Railroad about the depot. Within a few weeks, they had an answer saying that they would sell the depot for $1 provided it was moved off the property. It took about 3 years to buy the land from the railroad company and move the depot to this location, and it was moved from its original spot to right here at the park where it is today, and was completely restored to its former glory. And also you could visit the inside of it, but you'll need to go on tour for that or be accompanied by a volunteer. And also in the freight room, you'll find a diorama of what the railroad in Currie looked like back then, and you'll even see the train rolling on the tracks as well. And also, this station is one of 3 surviving train depots in Murray County as well. Okay, so I'm going to show you the exhibits inside the freight room, and here's the model railroad behind me that is used for demonstration purposes. It's an HO gauge model railroad. And let me get behind the camera and show you all the other exhibits. Okay, so here's some hard hats, and here's a picture of some railroads, some rolling stock, and here's some hats, oiling cans, and here's the model railroad. See, there's Jacob operating the train. Let's see, this is what Currie was like back in the day. That's the depot we're in. It was before it was right there. That's the engine house, which is original. That's when the depot was like that. Then carried across the street. There's the water tower. And here's some pieces, old pieces. And yeah, a lot to see in an old lantern.
What you see right behind me is Georgia Northern 102.
Georgia Northern 102 was built by Alco in Richmond, Virginia in 1923 and is the 642/80th steam locomotive built by that factory and is a 460 10-wheeler type steam locomotive. This locomotive spent its career on the Georgia Northern Railroad down in Georgia and was used as a freight locomotive for the railroad. Then later it was sold to Norton Coal Company in Ilsley, Kentucky as Norton Coal Company 102 sometime in the 1950s. Then in the 1960s it was retired and it was stored at the Ilsley property until it was sold to Richard Jensen in Ilsley, Kentucky. Then in 1984 was moved to Chicago, Illinois, and sat on a flat car and waited to be scrapped, but it didn't get scrapped though, which is good. Then it was donated to the Illinois Railway Museum in Union, Illinois, and then in 1993 was sold to Endo Line Railroad Park and Museum in Currie, Minnesota, and put right here. And also, after it arrived, it was being cosmetically restored to how it looks right now and preserved in this spot as well. Also, Georgia Northern 102 is the only surviving Georgia Northern 460 left in the world today, and seen here on display outdoors at Endo Line Railroad Park and Museum as well.
What you see right behind me is Minneapolis and St. Louis 1133.
Minneapolis and St. Louis 1133 was built in 1945 and is a wooden bay window caboose. This caboose was used for many years on the Minneapolis and St. Louis Railroad as the train crew's office and was used on the back of freight trains for many years. Then, later on, this caboose was retired and was put on display in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and in 2008 was moved to Endo Line Railroad Park and Museum in Currie, Minnesota, where it is today. Also, you can even go inside it, but you'll need to go on tour for that, though.
What you see right behind me is the water tower.
This water tower was used for the Chicago Northwestern Railroad and used for filling water into steam engines' water tanks, and this one may have been built in the 1800s or 1900s. It was originally located in Walnut Grove, Minnesota, along the railroad tracks. Then later, this water tower was retired and then got donated to Endo Line Railroad Park and Museum in Currie, Minnesota by Mr. and Mrs. Charles Baxter and can be seen displayed here at the park where it is today.
Okay, I'm going to show you the remains of the Hilfers Railroad, and here's the turntable. That's still here, and that's the so let me get behind the camera and show you the rest. Here's where the trains would all be stored in, and they're currently in the original engine house. And there's a water tower. It looks just like that one right there. And yeah. Well, I hope you all enjoyed learning about trains with me today in Matthew Lapp Train Guy segment show. Also, I hope to see you all again in the next segment. So this is Matthew Lapp, host of Matthew Lapp Train Guy segment show. Sign out until next time. All aboard.